Welcome everyone to our special edition WEAll Talk for this month of March. We are really excited about what is going to happen today here for everyone who is part of the 36 by 36 project and who could make it today and join us so we can learn more about them and about the project. And for those who are new for the WEAll Talk space, it's been going on for some time now. And WEAll Talks are those safe space where we love having deeper discussions on a specific topic. And it's usually brought by our members, the WEAll members, and citizens decide on a topic that they would like to share with everyone and participate on a deeper discussions. They do a brief presentation, and then there is the space for conversations, for ideas exchange, and knowledge exchange, basically. So today, as you all know, is going to be a different one because we're going to have the pleasure of listening to Amanda Janoo, our knowledge and policy lead. And at the same time, in this group of people, we are already like 36. Out of these 36 participants, there are members of the 36 by 36 project. And I hope that they will be able to identify themselves, at least on the chat. They can write down their names and maybe if they want where they're based in this beautiful planet, so we can learn about your names. And it's gonna facilitate me the second session of this part. So why is different this WEAll Talk today is because the first 30 minutes is going to be the presentation that Amanda Janoo is going to do to all of us. The second 30 minutes, it's going to be for breakout rooms where we're going to have each of the 36 by 36 participants that we're going to learn other names in a little tiny bit, leading on each of those breakout rooms. And they're going to bring, a space for those different groups to interact with each other and to respond to a couple of questions that they have already in there and, they know about it, but I will be sharing them on the chat. And then we will come back to the main room to share on that knowledge exchange and ideas exchange that has happened in each of the rooms to bring the knowledge and those ideas together, to bring the awareness and listen to each other. And then Amanda will do a wrap up to finalize this special WEAll Talk that is going to last today an hour and a half. That is different as well from the previous WEAll Talks. So I hope that this is all clear, that everybody's ready for the learnings, for the sharings. And Amanda, I'm going to leave it on the mic for you. I hope I didn't forget anything. If I did, please tell me. I hope I didn't.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I'm really excited about this WEAll Talk. So this is my first WEAll Talk, actually. And also, I'm just really excited about it because it's kind of the first opportunity for the WEAll family and the 36 by 36 family to really connect and start to get to know each other and start to really support each other. And so in thinking about how to sort of set up the 36 by 36 project and its relationship to WEAll, I was thinking a lot around my own sort of journey that got me here, right? Here today to be able to speak with all of you wonderful people, and how much my own sort of understanding of economics and of the economic system really required me to get down to the context, right? To get back and to understand where these ideas fundamentally came from. And so in thinking about this, I thought I would give a little bit of an overview of some of the history of economic thinking, right? And how it's sort of led to our current economic paradigm and the way that we even conceptualize of economics and the economy as a foundation for why a female-led revolution in economics is really important. So we can set the foundations for discussing all together how we can more proactively try to amplify and support new voices and perspectives and emerging leaders in this space who are don't look like, the traditional sort of economist, right? And so with that in mind, I thought I would sort of try to meld my own personal journey with an exploration into the history of economic thought. So I'm going to share a little presentation here. And for myself, my entry into economics actually came from feminist theory. So when I was in college, I went to a small liberal arts college. My first year, I got really into feminist theory because I was really frustrated with how much of my personhood and my identity seemed to be already defined and constrained on the basis of my gender, right? And so there's a lot of sort of objectification that happens as a woman where you're sort of seen first and heard second, and a lot of assumptions around how we're meant to act and our sort of trajectories and what's possible for us in this world. And so then I started to study this thing we call economics. And there was this strange sort of pseudoscience that was using a lot of mathematical equations and regression models. But at its core, there were some really strange assumptions that weren't making any sense to me intuitively, right? And the first one seemed to be that economics or the economy was its own separate sphere, that it was governed by its own laws, and that wasn't sort of influenced by our culture or societies. And the other was that we were fundamentally sort of selfish and individualistic and rational. And I was like, okay, hold up. Yeah, like these seem like very gendered assumptions, right? And so, because ultimately, we know that gender is a construct. But in traditional gender dichotomies, you have these stereotypes around the masculine and the feminine and how they sort of counterbalance each other. And so these stereotypes of masculinity around independence or selfishness, competitiveness, and being rational are sort of counterbalanced with this dependent, compassionate, cooperative, and emotional characteristics. And of course, all of us have to embody all of these in some way, right? And the world has to embody all of these in some way. But economics was only focusing on one side of this coin. And so I was really interested to understand where these assumptions came from, right? And what was the sort of impact they were having on the world. And so with that, I started my journey on the sort of, the history of economic train, right? And I do want to be honest with you that this could be a very quick and dirty tour, right? And so the range of thinking in the history of economic thought and the depth of thinking of these scholars is far beyond what we'll be able to talk about here today. But to understand sort of how we got to neoliberalism, right, and neoclassical economics, I think it's important to understand the context by which these ideas emerged and who was thinking about them and why. And so I should say that the idea of sort of economics as a sphere of study, or what it was called political economy, didn't really occur until the Industrial Revolution, right? And so there was discussions of different aspects of what we would think of the economy in terms of like the purpose of business or, those different dimensions. There were ideas around, investment and trade, but this idea of looking at the economy in its own right really emerged in the Industrial Revolution when in England there were huge transformations in terms of the way that society was being structured and cultural shifts and socioeconomic shifts. And so in thinking about and witnessing these profound transformations and also a huge amount of wealth creation that was occurring, there was this guy, Adam Smith, right? And Adam Smith tends to be the first person that if you dive into some sort of the background into the history of economic thought is thought of as sort of the father of economics. And the reason is because he sort of was looking at all of this wealth generation and opulence that was being produced in his country and wanted to understand what was really driving this wealth creation. And so he made two really important statements in his book, The Wealth of Nations, that I think have been quoted far too much, to be honest. But one was this idea of the invisible hand, right? And this invisible hand of the market as sort of facilitating our interactions with one another in the economic sphere. And the other was this quote that is not for the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker, we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. And so although there's a lot of other things that Adam Smith had said in this book and also in his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, these are the two things that people really tend to focus on a lot because it was a foundational idea that our intrinsic selfishness, right? This idea that we are selfish might actually not be a bad thing, because all of us acting in accordance with our selfish self-interest will ultimately be at the benefit of other people, because we'll ultimately supply them with the things they want, and will ultimately develop wealth for the nation. And so he actually was inspired a lot by French philosophers who came before, who developed this idea of laissez-faire, and social contract theorists like Locke and Hobbes, who were really trying to understand the foundations of human nature. But all of this thinking brought this idea, wove it together into this idea of a free market system, right? That we could allow for the economy to self-regulate itself, and the government could get out of the way and stop interfering with tariffs and taxes and all of this sort of nonsense. And so then these ideas are sort of understood as like classical economists, but it was still defined as political economy. And this was really solidified with John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book that really outlined the principles of this economic system. And he was the first one to define this idea of economic man, right? So this idea that in economics, don't worry about social constructions or the complexity of human nature. We can just always assume that in this particular space, people are rational and they're self-interested. And then you had, some people who were like, well, I don't know if I have such a rosy picture of the Industrial Revolution, right? And so you also had people like Karl Marx, who were still building on this tradition, but saying that actually this system is really exploitative. And he was the first one who coined the term capitalism, right? And so he developed the term capitalism to explain how this whole system of production that was developing all of this wealth was really just exploitation of people. But all of the things that this sort of group had in common was an exploration into the question of what are the drivers of wealth, right? And importantly, they were the ones who kind of started to define this realm of economics and a lot of the confines that we associate it with today, right? That we're looking at systems of production, that we're thinking about labor and capital. Trade was really important as an aspect of this. And the assumption was that wealth came from our work, right? So the way in which we transformed our natural environment and developed new things, and the work that we put into it, and the cost of all of those things was what determined the price of stuff and also the wealth generation for our nation. But then you had this sort of neoliberal revolution in economics. And part of this came because with Marx and the communist revolutions and a lot of the socialist thinkers were saying, okay, well, if labor and our work is the foundation of wealth, and then this is all an exploitative system. And the neoclassical economists were like, actually, don't worry about that, because what determines prices of things and the value of things is actually not our labor, but rather how much consumers want that thing, right? So it's this idea of like consumer preference or the utility of products. And so with that, they were able to sort of get around the more social issues with some of these assumptions in economics and what drives this system. And this guy, Alfred Marshall, was really viewed as like a big driver in this neoclassical revolution. And he was influenced by this guy, Jevons, who really thought, okay, let's bring some scientific rigor to this. Let's really bring all of these principles together and turn it into a more mathematically rigorous discipline based on these assumptions around, supply and demand and consumer, preferences and utility functions and general equilibrium, right? And so all of that was kind of happening in the background. And then you had the Great Depression and World War II. And all of a sudden, people were like, uh-oh, yeah, like these ideas don't seem like we can't really afford to just be sitting here and allowing the system to just be doing whatever it's doing, because clearly it's not working, right? And so you had this rise in macroeconomics and the Keynes and this idea that, okay, well, maybe the state does have an important role to play in trying to sort of make sure that these fluctuations aren't too big and making sure that you're sort of stimulating demand. And so there were a lot of debates still around the role of the market versus the state in these transformations. But importantly, during this time, this is when we shifted to really having a popular conception of the economy, right? Because previously, even 100 years ago, people might talk about wealth or trade or, different aspects, but they wouldn't have had an idea of the economy. And so it was with the creation of GDP around this time, right? And this measurement to understand how much we were producing and consuming, that this number really took off, right? And it became a really important way in which we started to understand what the economy was and to sort of monitor how it was performing and figure out how to get out of this sort of Great Depression. And so with all of these sort of foundations led, we also realized that we were part of this global economic system, and a lot of our political challenges were related to economic dynamics. And so there was the emergence of a global economic governance system with Bretton Woods and the creation of the IMF and the World Bank, with all of these dudes coming together and sort of, figuring out how can we stabilize the fluctuations of currencies worldwide. And alongside this, and the view that, oh no, so we have communism, we have Keynesianism, there was still this idea that we should really keep a hands-off approach to the economy, right? And what I do want to say is that with liberalism, it was a really important movement, right? Because it was challenging this idea of monarchs and governments controlling every aspect of our lives. But with the Montpellier society and the rise of neoliberalism, this idea sort of shifted in some ways, where even though the rhetoric was a lot around let's remove the state from the economy, in reality, it was a lot around let's actually shift the way that the state is supporting the economy, right? And so with all of these sort of shifts and influences, you ended up with probably the most famous sort of economist of the 80s and 90s, Milton Friedman, bringing in a totally new perspective on, it's not even just self-interest, greed. Greed is good. Greed is going to really drive this system, and that we should actively be encouraging and promoting these sort of selfish behaviors. And what this ended up doing is that it was a shift from not just becoming sort of a theoretical model to becoming a cultural narrative, right? So if we assume that people are selfish and greedy and materialistic and competitive, and then we actively create incentives and reward that kind of behavior, right? Then it becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That we see that these people are succeeding and that is good. And so this, the studies that identify how many of the richest people in our world have psychopathic kind of characteristics shouldn't be that surprising, right? Because ultimately, a psychopath or sociopathic behavior is sort of a perfect economic man, right? Somebody who doesn't really have a lot of empathy or consideration for how their sort of actions are affecting others. And so all of this led to what I think everybody here will be familiar with, right? Like the sort of myth around trickle-down economics. Let's just grow the economy as fast as possible, get the rich as possible. They'll be able to stimulate investment and create new jobs, and we'll be able to just keep growing forever. And what happened, importantly, though, is that even though you'll notice that these ideas really came from a very small section of society, right? So the US, the UK, Europe, it became a global project in the sense that the IMF and the World Bank really implemented so many of these ideas and forced them onto countries through structural adjustment programs. And so for, decades now, we've been seeing globalization that is being driven by these assumptions. And it's not only changing the structure of our economy and leading to increasing consolidations of power and wealth in the hand of multinationals, but it's also it's changing cultures, right? It's changing societies. It's changing the way in which they are relating to one another. And so when all of this led, right, to the global financial crisis that spread throughout the whole world, there was this moment when it seemed like, okay, neoliberalism is dead, right? Like this whole idea doesn't really make sense. neoclassical economics is clearly not working to explain the way that we should be managing our economies, but yet it seemed to prevail, right? And so for myself personally, I was working in international development and economic policy, doing trade and industrial policy work, trying to support structural transformation, trying to re-empower the state. I really felt like that was sort of the way that I was going to challenge neoliberalism. But one of the most profound things for me, actually, in this whole, like period, was after the financial crisis, I had a chance to go to this event that was organized by the Club of Rome. And I met for the first time some female economists. Yeah. And so I met Catherine Trebek and I met Kate Raworth. And it was a revolution for me. Yeah. Like I met these women who were not really interested in describing how the economy worked, right? But we're interested in really understanding how we transform it. And so Kate hadn't released her book Donut Economics yet, but was talking about the ideas of this different kind of economics textbook, challenging the ideas and the assumptions that were in it. Catherine was talking about this idea of WEAll and of a government partnership of countries that could illustrate that a different sort of economic system and management was possible. For me, that really opened up a lot of what I thought was possible in this space. And so with that, Catherine told me about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And so I started to volunteer with this community and I got to meet all of you. And it was like coming home, right? It was like meeting all of these people who not only saw the challenges and the issues with our current economic thinking, but were really willing to support and amplify and listen to my ideas as well and to take them seriously, right? And that in and of itself was so empowering. And so now we have a huge shift, right? So we already have seen since the financial crisis a lot of interest in more heterodox or different types of economic thinking and the emergence of more women in this economic thinking space. But with COVID, we're also at a moment of just such transformation. And we're seeing this reaction of trying to move back to old thinking, right? So some Keynesianism, right? Like maybe some Marxism, all of these sort of ideas. But we're also seeing communities reevaluating fundamental questions around value and what matters in life and the ways in which we produce and provide for one another and the sustainability of those. And so with this moment, one of my favorite things about thinking about the 36 by 36 project is the fact that it came to Vala, one of the original sort of thinkers for this project, in a dream, right? And her dream was that if 36 men could come into a room together and craft the fundamental values and principles of neoliberalism that would come to influence our entire world, then why can't we bring together 36 women from around the world to really radically reconceptualize of the principles? And so she got together with Petra and Catherine and Jenith and really thought about what would this kind of project look like? And what could they contribute to this movement, right? And so this 36 by 36 project is just beginning, but it's bringing together from all over the world and from all of the continents these incredible new thinkers who are challenging a lot of the fundamental assumptions in economics and asking them to explore and to challenge one another and to think about what are the foundations of this economic system and how can we move beyond a lot of the constraints that predefine our thinking in this space. And so ultimately, right, when you go through the history of economic thought, you realize that changes in history, right, influence the way we think about the economy. And the way we think about the economy influences the way we manage it, right? But throughout all of these big changes, historically, it has been a very small group of old white men who have been the ones who have really interpreted what these changes meant and what the economy is, what economics is, and how it functions, right? And so if we acknowledge that pretty much everything about this discipline, is failing, and it's not working in line with the realities of our contemporary world, and neoliberalism and neoclassical economics are in crisis, then there is a space, there is an opportunity for really radical new conceptions of the economy to challenge even the starting assumptions of what we mean by that, right? What if it's not about production or trade or labor, right? Or capital? What if this is not around questions of wealth and growth? What if there are fundamental other ideas around what this whole aspect of life on this planet means to us? And so this is the time more than ever, I think, that we really need to amplify and support new voices and perspectives in this space. And I think that considering the fact that even now, at least in the United States, only 13% of economists are women, right? That we have a huge opportunity to empower and amplify and more proactively uplift the voices of women in this space, and to hear how they view this thing we call an economy, but also to expand our global geography and to get out of Europe and the United States when we consider those perspectives as well. And so this is the reason why, for me, I'm so excited about the 36 by 36 project, and for the conversations we'll have now on how we can proactively go about supporting these shifts. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, thank you. That was a really good start for what is coming next. And now is actually having the opportunity to meet in those breakout rooms with the participants of 36 and those incredible thinkers. So what I have been doing at the very beginning, and so thank you all of you for introducing yourself in the chat, I have been creating the breakout rooms. And there you're gonna have 30 minutes for introducing to each other, so you can talk with those in your group about what you're doing, where you're putting your focus. You can learn from those in the group and those members of WEAll. And at the same time, I would love you to dedicate some time to respond to these two questions. Why is female-led transformation in economic thinking needed? And how can we support and amplify the work of leading and emerging female thinkers in this field? That would be a really good information to bring back to the main room when we come back after 30 minutes of spending some time is changing ideas. So if everyone is okay with that, I'm going to divide you into those breakout rooms, and we'll see you in 30 minutes. Enjoy the time for exchanging, for getting to know each other, and for all the ideas that you're going to be sharing. All right, well, as Amanda was saying, we hope that you had enough time to go deeper into the questions, and Amanda, the space is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really interested to sort of hear what your perspective was on these questions. So there were a lot of different groups and a lot of different people who are bringing different perspectives and experiences to this. But with the first question of why do you think a female revolution in economic thinking is important, does anybody want to share any ideas that sort of came up in their discussions around that, and why you think this sort of shift is important? You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak. Yeah, and Ruben's welcome.
Kai is going to talk for our group.
Okay, thank you for this
Right.
for this spontaneous action. Okay, yeah, I think we agreed that we were only 3 in our group, and we agreed that one of the first slides you showed us, Amanda, with the values, the typical like male associated values versus the female associated values, that says it all. That's if you imagine that we would create, or we would build, or an economy would evolve based on these values, on the right hand side values, then this would be an economy that would work, is our conviction. That would be much better, and because it's more directed at creating well-being and also at the community. So it just makes sense to do that. It's the most obvious thing you could do, and basically it's very strange that we that we chose the other ones. You explained why it happened, but it doesn't make sense. So I think that basically is the essence of what we said there.
I love it. Thank you so much. Anyone else have any thoughts on? Yeah, all right.
Okay, yeah, we had quite a number.
Oh,
Ore?
I think the connection is cutting out.
Oh no. Oh, she's back. She's back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can, but you
Okay.
froze for a minute, so you might need to repeat yourself.
Okay.
Saying.
Well, okay. Well, we had quite a number of points in our group for that question, and we felt that if female-led transformation in economic thinking is necessary to, first of all, promote equal opportunities for women, to hold men accountable, and also for the important fact that women actually do make effective leaders. And the very typical example that we have is the current president of New Zealand, just in how she's doing very, very incredible with her leadership, and also the current Director General of World Trade Organization as well. Then we also mentioned the fact that we need a female-led transformation in economic thinking to challenge the status quo and also change the narrative that centers around the new visions or economic ways of thinking.
I love it. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else have any thoughts? Adriana.
Thank you very much. Yeah, our discussion was very interesting. First of all, well, Peter Doran pointed out this very important thing. We need a female transformation because it's legitimate. We are the half of the humanity, and it's not something just about transformation, but it's just about equality and justice. And just for that, we need it. So I could just like end up the discussion with that point, but we had other points. The feminist perspective, or the feminine perspective, has been one of marginalization and exclusion, but also it has been about looking other parts of the human experience, such as care, such as community, such as solidarity, and that part is needed we have to take this part to the economy to really reflect what we as human beings and as sentient beings need to function. And also because on the most oppressional part, it has been very we have a lot of evidence that investing in women reflects in impact and well-being for the community, but not only in the community, but also in other aspects, such as things as hard as business is good business to invest in women, because we bring other traits as, for example, good communication and creative alternatives to solve problems. Yeah, so that would be the answer to the first part of the question.
I love that. Awesome. And then Neela, and then I'll ask everybody the second question of how do we actually foster this shift? Yeah. So Neela, what does your group think?
Thank you, Amanda. I was talking with Martin, and then we had also Mariana that joined us in the conversation. And well, it was nice also to see with Martin, we were actually located in the same country in the Netherlands. So we're going to connect again after for sure. So that's nice to meet people. So thank you for that breakout room distribution. And Martin is already delivering trainings for the new type of economies. And he was actually admitting that he was not giving enough space yet for female perspectives in those trainings, and he said he would include them, right, Martin? Yes. And we also talked about this aspect of not just gender related, but as Adriana, you were mentioning, this feminine parts, more of the feminine values and qualities that are missing because they're culturally and with the way society has been made until now, being associated to women, even though they're not just related to the gender itself organically when we talk about it, but they are missing in the discussion, especially Amanda, with that KPI you were showing about this psychopath nature of some CEOs, maybe they don't have enough feminine qualities about empathy and well-being for others and care for all stakeholders that may be missing. And then enlarging the female representation that we all recognize is not enough, because it does not represent the reality of the population, and there is inequality. And then going back to the justice that is missing in that side, we were enlarging the conversation to consider all type of diversity, and just recognizing that there should be more diversity in the decision-making table, because if it's being decided by a small group of people that are living under the similar conditions with some privilege and just very specific living conditions, then they would build a system that would suit their own interest or their own vision of reality. Whereas if we bring other realities and perspective and more representation of what the people are and the different stakeholders are in reality, then we can make sure that the system does also create value for all stakeholders and not just for one type of stakeholder. So just trying to go even beyond the gender and thinking, how can we have more space for this type of discussions so that people feel comfortable and not like feel weird not being part of a normal. And then the last part of the conversation was also acknowledging how it could be difficult to bring this type of change, that's like just questioning status quo is not easy and it's scaring people, and that's kind of transition for you to the second question that you're going to ask. So I'm going to stop here.
I love it, but that was the perfect transition anyways, right? Because I think you were already touching on a concrete sort of action, right, Martin, of bringing in some more diversity into the sort of training activities, and also the importance of a diversity of perspectives in decision-making spaces. And so, so when we think about, like, how do we actively move, right, from recognizing this need to proactively supporting it, how can we as a community, right, like really work to amplify and support emerging and leading sort of female thinkers in this space and bringing more diversity of that perspective. Sarah, did you want to speak to this, or the earlier question as well, so.
No, I want to talk about the role of the importance of the feminist economy, but I want to bring a completely different perspective from what we thought, because we were in a group with Michael Hanlon. Besides doing a lot of great stuff he's doing in Lancaster, talking about circular economy and so far so on, he also teaches salsa. So he makes this amazing parallel, this metaphor about the role of the women and the men in a dance, especially salsa, right? That you really need equity, you really need equality to make this happen. Each one has his role, each one has a function. No one it's more important than another, but we cannot live without both. So I just want to bring this. Let's think about economy and also like the dance we want, in the play we want to build, that we need to have equity in order to have this flow and the balance and really a good show. So just bring a very, very different perspective.
No, I love that. Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, I think, even the notion of a dichotomy, right, of like this binary comes from a very particular tradition and philosophical thought, right? And breaking out of that idea and thinking about, within ourselves and within any system, the sort of balance of all things. That's beautiful.
It's time to have the right balance. We had them in the past, like you show, but now like a salsa dance shows the balance. Yes,
that's awesome. Crystal.
Yeah, thanks. We had such a great discussion, and really I was reflecting on the need for silence, actually, and the need for more spaces where groups can reflect deeply within and find their own inner wisdom when there is so many opinions and different frameworks and things, and that really helps people who are marginalized, whether it's by gender, race, or just because they're an introvert, actually bring forth their unique contributions. So I feel like the more we can facilitate and create those kind of inclusive spaces that allow for reflection and meaningful conversation that really gets to the nuance of things, like today, giving us ample time. I think that will naturally bring forward the voices of women and those which have been marginalized, and as well decentralizing our organizational structures. I've seen that we use sociocracy at the Post-Growth Institute, and just really how we bring out the best in other people, women or men, just ways that we can kind of decentralize the hierarchy and bring decision-making and more transparency and things like participatory budgeting. I feel like this naturally brings out women's voices and others who have been marginalized before. So those are my thoughts.
Oh, I love it. So much wisdom there, Crystal. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, I'm an aspiring Quaker, so I very much appreciate the power of silence. Yeah. Does anybody else have any ideas on, yeah, Jen?
Hi everyone. So we had a really great conversation, and I just want to sort of add two things into the mix. I think the first one is just to recognize that the conversation matters, and that the conversation itself, especially a global one like this, helps to give us all confidence, and particularly when we're working sometimes in silos and sometimes removed from the community that we're part of. It's actually really nice just to come together and feel that actually there is a connection to a bigger movement. So thank you for that space. The other thing that we talked about was the importance of this point in time in the pandemic, and the opportunity to see the change as the driving force behind how we build forward or build better, whichever terminology speaks to you. And I was really taken by something that Leopoldo was saying about actually we need to position ourselves at the center of that rather than the periphery. And I think doing that effectively is going to take a lot of work on ourselves, as well as, a lot of work that we can share. So there are practical things, but I think there's also, in that capacity building and confidence building space that we can help each other with. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes. Charlene.
As we are just listening to everyone and the conversation that we have in the breakout room, I also was reminded of the conversation that me and my wife had on the eve of Kamala Harris being elected as a vice president. We were sharing that why is the need that, and why will the women be so successful? Because they have already gone through so many problems. And they have mostly figure out a way to around those problems, and it is just a need of scalability and an opportunity that they will have, and once they have that, and they will try to apply it on a larger scale. So they have a added advantage. I think they have an edge over many men. So cheers to that.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, but that question of how do we proactively ourselves and also encourage women to really come to the center, as sort of Jen was saying, right? And be really important voices in the way we articulate and envision this different system, right? And the different sort of response to COVID. And so does anybody else have any thoughts? I mean, we have right here, obviously, this incredible WEAll community, but we also have the 36 by 36 project. And so the 36 by 36 project, this is really about amplifying the thinking of these women, not only as individuals, but also as a collective sort of group as well. So does anybody have any thoughts on what we can do as a community in WEAll, right? To more proactively sort of bring their thinking and support their ideas? Isabel.
Cool. Just want to say there's a lot of power in storytelling. And it was very interesting yesterday. I was speaking to this man from Somalia, and he was telling me about, how like the economic system works there. And that's a story that needs to be shared, right? Because from maybe a Northern Western perspective, you might think, oh gosh, that's not a democracy, or that doesn't work in a democratic form, and it does. And I think those are the stories that make people think, or like stories are what make people think or what resonate with people. So something that I would be curious to hear more of and see more of are the stories of these 36 women, where they came from, why this is interesting, why their context is important to the movement. And I think in terms of how to shift our economic system, these stories are a pretty strong foundation. So I would love to see more of that. And also like from the member network as well, you know, if anyone has a story to share. I think those are what seem to be the most compelling as people can relate. So that's an ask and an inquiry. What I'd love to see.
Love that. Peter. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on the point about narrative and the importance of story. I think your introduction was in a way the privileged story of the rise of the dominant economic structures that we live under, and the system reproduces itself both through think tanks and university professors, and obviously those who occupy positions of power. But I think the system also reproduces itself through its capture of the attention economy. You know, the dominant cultural narratives in the Hollywood factory, the social media, gaming, children's gaming. The system reproduces a certain view of humanity, a rather narrow view of humanity. And I would like to see 36 by 36 maybe focusing on the attention economy as well as the traditional ideas or theories of how the economy works. Thanks.
Love that. So, I mean, based on this, actually, I think it would be nice. Do any of the 36 by 36 participants want to tell us quickly why they were drawn to this project? Yeah, and maybe their understanding of the 36 by 36 project to sort of share with the WEAll community. I can't see all of the. No. All right. Well then,
I can go.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Julia.
Mariana as well, so I can be quick. Well, the reason I joined the network at the beginning, I have to admit that I struggled with the fact that we were all women. I was thinking, is this the right way to go? Like, should we be all women, or should we be more diverse? Like, should we include men, and how are we going to include men to the conversation? And but then I realized that it feels like we need to level up at some point. Like, I feels like there is a need to start somewhere, to having conversations around the obstacles that we have in order to kind of be in the same place or in the same space as men, and to have that space. We have to start somewhere. And I felt like we need kind of in parallel to have those things. So we need to, in order not for us to force ourselves to be into a structure that might not hold us. So how do we have those conversations parallel to understand what are the obstacles, what do we need, how can we change, and not force ourselves to fit into something, or to fit men into something that is not right, or is not right for both. So I think that's the reason that I felt this space was so sacred and the right space for that. So yeah.
that. Thank you so much for sharing, Juliana. Mariana.
Yes, many thanks. On my side, I could say for mainly two reasons. There are for sure more than that, but I will limit to two. First is that I have been very influenced by a theory of change by two women, which are Margaret Whitley and Deborah Frisley, which is called the two-loop model. And in the two-loop model, there is this idea of connection, of the importance of connecting for a new system to emerge. And I thought that this project was an opportunity to actually connect with other women. And a second reason is that I am a woman myself, but actually I'm surrounded by a lot of men. So I do not know actually at what extent I really have the feminine perspective, or I have been influenced. So actually being surrounded by women, and in particular by women from other cultures that is not the Occidental world, I think can help me enrich my perspective. And that is in a way a second reason. I stop there. Thank you.
I love that. Vala, I wanted to see if you wanted to share anything as well as sort of the visionary for this project around sort of your ideas of why this sort of initiative is important, what you hope we can achieve through WEAll and 36 by 36.
Well, this dream I had sort of showed me, in no uncertain ways. It was very vivid, that we had these elderly gentlemen sitting in a room, in a smoke-filled room, coming up with the neoliberal economy, and then, the Powell memorandum being written to support that, and they managed to get masses of funding. It was actually, I think they got $40 million or something in 1972 or in the 1970s to support, writing the textbooks and then supporting new professors in the economics departments and taking over the business schools, etc. It was all very well directed. So in my dream, I had, women in a sunlit eco-lodge coming up with a new model, and then we, for the 21st century, which actually cared about people and planet. And I see this project as being, sort of rebalancing the imbalance, because I've seen several articles calling for women's involvement in various issues that are linked to the economy, where they are lacking expertise or involvement. So the 36 by 36 was actually the idea that came out of a conversation between Catherine and Petra and myself. And Catherine had the idea we would have young women, which is very good that we actually did that instead of trying to choose senior women. But then the 36 by 36 meant that they would all go back to their community and replicate what we were doing in this project in order to make it sort of fly in different communities and different languages and so on. So that is what we are hoping, that the women who are taking part, and we actually have 48 and not 36, so they can actually amplify what we found in this project in their own communities, whether they are global or local or whatever, in business or academia or communities or whatever. So I'm very hopeful that this actually will create an avalanche.
I love that. Thank you so much, Bella. Create an avalanche, right? Yeah, so we've only got 2 more minutes, so I think I'll just wrap up this special WEAll talk. I really want to thank everybody for joining this session. This is just the beginning, right? I mean, WEAll is young. This project just started. I think we're seeing how much interest and demand and desire there is for really different economic thinking. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this community where we can come together with warmth and equity and connection, right? And to recognize that we are all stronger than the sum of our parts, right? So with that, I hope that everybody has an amazing week and that you will join us as we continue to have events around 36 by 36, and try to just always keep in your mind this question of how can we really think outside of the box of our own preconceived notions and consider really different perspectives about what this economy is and how we might interpret economics, right? So with that, I wish you and fair do, yeah, right.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you all for joining us today. I just wanted to add one thing. For those of you who have not joined just yet the WEAll Citizens platform, you can still be in touch with all the incredible women that you have met today, that you have had the opportunity to see physically and have a conversation with. So they're all on the WEAll Citizens platform. And of course, if you ever want to or need the connection or how to reach them, just get in touch with Amanda, with me, with Lisa, with Isabel, with the amplification team. I will be more than happy to make sure that that connection is done. Again, thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I just say really briefly, on the website 36by36.org, there's a newsletter sign up. I would encourage you all to sign up for that so that you receive updates about the project. And in particular, in the summer, we're going to be organising public dialogues where we want to bring a real range of people in on very specific topics to work with the women on the manifesto that they're developing through the programme this year.